Next up, Josh Fox.
Hi, how are you?
How are you?
Nice to see you again. First of all, I wanted to say thank you very much to Senator Ball and to the New York State Senate for this opportunity. I'm honored and grateful to be able to appear here today to testify. I also very much appreciate the fact that you went on a tour of Pennsylvania. I think it was a very brave act. I think a very important act for a person coming from your party. And I think that you've seen here today the power and the importance of citizen testimony. I've been asking congressmen and senators in Washington, D.C. to please hold citizen hearings. And I don't think any of us can speak as loud as the experience of Victoria Schweitzer or Craig and Julie Sautner. I want to put that in context. For the last 3.5 years, I have gone all across the United States, to Europe, to Africa, and to Australia, and I've investigated this form of drilling as a result of, many people know the story of being offered a gas lease on my family's property in the Everglades River Basin in Pennsylvania, just across from the New York border. And that has taken me all across the world, and I have heard hundreds of those stories, if not thousands. And I would encourage you to continue the process, citizen hearings, as you go through this continued inquiry, and to get people from Wyoming, to get people from Colorado, to get people from far-flung places. Because I think what that does is it points to the inherent contamination of this process and how it's failing everywhere it goes. So my testimony is in fierce and passionate opposition to permitting large-scale industrial gas drilling by means of hydraulic fracturing anywhere in New York State. The health and character of New York State will be significantly and forever compromised by this inherently unsafe and untested process. The process will destroy property value, as you heard, fragment and fracture the land, contaminate water resources, pollute air quality, create a public health crisis. It will significantly harm the tourism and agriculture industries in the state and the region, and make areas that are heavily developed unfit to live in for generations to come. I will state at the outset that to truly relate my experience in testimony would take several hours, if not several days, and I may not get through all of this, but I would appeal to the senator and other senators' staffs to please use me as a resource on any questions you have going forward. I'm at your disposal. So I'm the filmmaker of the Academy Award-nominated documentary Gasland. I'm a resident of the Delaware River Basin in Mononville, less than 5 miles from the New York border. And I'm also a resident of Brooklyn, New York, and I drink my tap water. I've been living with the stress that the stream and the woods just across from my property in Pennsylvania will be turned into an industrial drilling zone, and that my New York tap water will become unreliable for 3.5 years now. I've investigated fracking, traveling to 34 states in the US, Europe, Africa, Asia, and Australia, and I have yet to see this industry do anything but harm to the areas it occupies. I've toured Texas, Pennsylvania, Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, Arkansas, and faraway Australia extensively, all places which claim to have tough regulations on natural gas drilling, all places that have been dealing with drilling for many years, which have had the chance to improve upon their regulatory framework while drilling is occurring. And I must report that even though these places boast tough regulations, I have yet to visit any place on earth where a regulatory approach to drilling made the activity safe to live near. I therefore must conclude that the argument that tough regulation of natural gas drilling will make fracking safe to live near is unfounded and unsupported by any legitimate study of the practice as it is happening in the world at large. And that's the bulk of what I'm saying here. The regulatory approach does not work. And I must caution the lawmakers of New York State, present company accepted, many of whom continue to insist that, quote, New York can get it right by imposing a tough regulatory framework, of the pitfalls of political hubris and braggadocio. Such statements are wishful thinking at best, and at worst, criminally negligent in the face of the disastrous track record in other states. Texas and Pennsylvania also claimed that all they needed to do was adopt a tough regulatory stance and drilling could be done right. But the record shows hundreds of contamination cases, as documented in my film, and documented in the New York Times, and in the Pulitzer Prize-winning stories found on the ProPublica website, and hundreds of citizens. What follows is widespread suffering, degradation, and general disillusionment with the political process in the drilling areas in those states. In case after case, the gas industry, once it has established itself, proves to be more powerful than the state that seeks to regulate.
Wow.
And this is exactly what you heard from the Cabot contesting the DEP's determination that they had, in fact, polluted the groundwater of Dimmick. They said, we don't believe it. Take a hike. We're more powerful than you. And there are many ways in which that happens, and I can elaborate. So when someone says to me, I believe that we can drill safely, I always ask the same question. On what grounds do you believe that? Based on what scientific, proven study? Which one of the methods do you believe can be done safely that have never been tested by a rigorous, independent, peer-reviewed testing process for safety in the long or the short term? I could as easily substitute the sentence, I believe I can go over Niagara Falls in a barrel and survive. So simply put, I have no confidence whatsoever in the gas industry's ability to drill for gas while maintaining the quality of life. I want to go through a few of the things that I've observed. I made a list off the top of my head. It's about 66 things that haven't been tested. That if you were to say, well, we believe this could be done safely by creating a regulatory framework, you would have to, I guess, begin a rigorous scientific study of each of these areas over a period of years to make sure that those regulations actually were based in scientific fact and trial and error. One, no regulation should be approved without a proper cumulative impact study of the effect of 100,000 gas wells and the corresponding pipelines, compressor stations, refineries, truck trips, injection wells, waste impoundments, and access roads will have on New York State, because the projection is around 100,000 gas wells. There is no conceivable way.
Is that it, Josh? So,
Yeah.
So the projection is 100,000 gas wells in New York.
Well, based on spacing bills and based on the gleeful projections of the DCNR in Pennsylvania of 180,000 gas wells in Pennsylvania, I would estimate, yes, that no one really knows for sure how many gas wells the industry is projecting, and certainly to inflate these projections advances their credit line. A lot of this has to do with valuing their company based on reserves rather than on actual amounts of gas that we don't know. But the figures are very, very high. 100,000 gas wells in New York State compared to what you would say 180,000 in Pennsylvania, I think it's.
And out of the 180,000 in Pennsylvania, how many active wells are there right now in Pennsylvania?
It's about 3,000 Marcellus wells. So only 3,000 wells out of a projected 180,000 have caused the amount of problems that you're seeing in every single county where drilling is happening. Dimmick is not an exception. Dimmick is the rule. Dimmick is happening in Susquehanna County. Dimmick is happening in Bradford County. Dimmick is happening in Fayette County, in Greene County, in Washington County, in Potter County, in every county that's drilling in Pennsylvania. Drilling is also, the same scenario is also being played out in Colorado, Wyoming, Texas, Australia, across the board. And I want to submit here my film, Gasland, which tells a lot of these stories on behalf of the citizens. It's honest reporting, it's been vetted by the science. And I also wanted to submit this flash drive, which is in the shape of Texas, as a reminder. Perhaps where not to go with this, which includes a number of different studies and also our rebuttal to the fierce industry smear campaign against the film, which is facetious and untrue. And there's a 39-page PDF in there with 100 different references that combats the industry's PR campaign against the film and against people like Craig and Victoria. So just going through these, there is no long-term study of human health risk. There is no enforcement capability within New York DEC, local law enforcement, or citizen or federal groups adequate of handling the amount of oversight needed for that many wells. There is no adequate inspection capability for gas wells in the long term or the short term by the state. There can be no adequate standards for well casing depth because there's been never been a scientific study taking a look at this particular geology. And natural fractures vary in depth and length in these different geologies. There is no tested and no proven solution to the industry-wide problem of casing failure. By the industry's own admission, 1 out of every 20 casings will experience an immediate failure upon drilling, not upon fracking, immediate. So that means you're going to have a problem 5% of the time. If you take a look at Dimmick, and I'm skipping around here just for time, 1 out of 32 wells, according to DEP, caused a 9 square mile contamination area in Dimmick. If you take that figure and multiply it by 100,000 wells at that contamination rate, 1 out of 32, which is generous, it's probably more. You've contaminated every square inch of the Marcellus Shale covering New York. And you have to go by the statistics. This is the way these things play out. There's 1 in 1,000 chance of a blowout in Pennsylvania. We've had 2 blowouts. All right. So there are no proven standards for well casing cement that have been scientifically tested. There are no proven standards for well casing pressure tests. There are no proven standards or limitations on frac pressures or pressure testing materials involving including casing or pipes. The reason why I'm going through this laundry list is because the truth is that no one, except perhaps the industry, actually knows what is going on and why this is all failing so much. Why we're having so many cases of water contamination. Could be surface contamination, could be casing failures, could be the fractures going all the way up to the surface, as I've heard from industry people who said, "Come here, I got to tell you something." And I said, "Will you testify in Congress?" And they said, "No." You know, it could be the fact that you have natural fractures, that the frac fluids migrate up. It could be the fact that you have an old orphan gas well, or a coal mine, or oil well somewhere in that geology that isn't accounted for, that you hit when you frack. It could be that you frack the next well when you have this well being fracked. See what I'm saying? So there's many, many possibilities, and this would take a study. I've asked Weston Wilson of EPA to take a look and say, well, what would this be? How would you actually take a look at this? He said, well, it would be about a $30 million study just to do one geology. So you'd have to do 5 or 6 different wells, frack them all, figure out where all those fluids are going, and take a look at that in many, many different instances. You'd essentially have to replicate the scale of drilling to find out what is going on with any reliable scientific credibility. Does it make sense? So therefore, any regulatory framework is speculative. I can keep going. I'm on number 12. But you know what I'm saying? Companies that have, you can go on here. Companies have not been and are not required to report drilling logs, drilling mud records, frac chemical records, depths, frac pressures, directional drilling locations to the public, so there are no records of significant parts of this technology open for public review. There are no proven studies of how drill cutting disposal or storage affects water quality. There are no studies of the effects of the disposal of drill pit lining. There is no history of the proven safety of synthetic drilling muds, which are injected before wells are cased, which Mr. Northrup pointed out. Drilling muds are injected before the wells are cased. Those are going directly into the aquifers. They're turning up in people's water wells. Drilling muds are often synthetic and are petroleum products which are drilled directly into aquifers before the casing process. This can go on and on.
Josh, you can submit the testimony.
I think I will.
I think that, you know, in the Air Force, you use so many acronyms that, you know, we get to a meeting and it's as if when somebody new comes in, they should be handed a sheet with all the acronyms. I think during this hearing, if you don't mind just speaking a little bit about the process of fracking, what you've seen firsthand. When you talk about the residents who came here today, the devastation that they saw in their wells, and then the industry itself, the shell game that they play, where they're actually providing water, but they're not taking responsibility. They do a test, but they're not testing for what's in the fracking fluid. If you can just kind of put it in a nutshell, explain the process.
The fact that this process is so technically complicated works in the industry's favor because they can do a lot of smoke and mirrors games. But basically what happens is, this is a lie from the very beginning to the very end of the process. When they come to you to lease your land, the first thing that they will tell you is, this is perfectly safe and you're going to make lots of money. Both of which can not be true. So they're coming in, as you heard Craig's testimony, and basically selling you a bill of goods. It says this is what you're going to get out of the process. And if you sign that lease, and they show you a picture of a Christmas tree, like a little thing, it looks like a fire hydrant in the middle of the field. Then when this process goes on, your land is rapidly industrialized. You have pipelines, you've got compressor stations, you've got well pads themselves. There are inevitably problems with some of the people's water that start to become reported, or they're not reported. If you go ahead and complain, the company you lease from will say, well, that was the contractor's fault. That wasn't our fault, so you have to call the contractor. And so you end up going through a series of hoops. And if you go and perhaps complain to Pennsylvania DEP, they'll take a long time to come out, depending on what the governor, if it's Rendell or if it's Corbett, has decided. Your tests will either be processed there by the people you're working with, or they'll end up in Harrisburg for 6 months for some reason, and you won't get those water tests back. And a lot of people are complaining about that kind of thing. Then you're basically faced with a situation where you are forced to prove what happened 8,000 feet into the ground as a landowner on your own, with limited ability to pay for water testing. I mean, you have the possibility of 600 different possible fracking chemicals that could be used, and with no reporting requirements, you have to invent, well, the EPA in Region 8 of Pavilion, Wyoming, which is featured in the film, when they went in and tried to find out what had gone wrong with these people's water, they literally had to invent the tests to figure out what chemicals were there, because the drilling companies weren't going to tell them what they were using. And these tests did not exist for some of these chemicals. So they're really doing a serious detective mission. This has been going on for 3 years. Every year, their findings are worse and worse. Every year, they're telling those people in the pavilion, don't bathe in your water, don't drink in your water, don't drink your water, don't use it. And those people have no arrangements with the companies to deliver water. They're buying water at Walmart. So this is going on and on all across the nation. And time and again,
Josh,
the
just
industry
so
is...
people understand,
Yeah.
so sorry for, when we're talking about supplying water to a household, can you talk a little bit about monthly cost? Because it's not just picking up 2 jugs and, you know.
Well, it varies from place to place. It depends on how much water you're going to get. John Fenton out in Pavilion, Wyoming, that's featured in the film, was driving 60 miles to get his water from a friend or a relative that he knew their water was okay. Crystal Stroud, who you and I visited with on this tour, had contaminated water. She had radioactive water. She had barium in her water, and she ended up with barium in her blood and in her 4-year-old son's blood without knowing that she was drinking this contaminant until her hair started falling out in the shower. Her water supply, I believe she said, was $2,500 for 2 months, and a friend was paying it as a favor because it felt sympathy for her. And she wouldn't have been able to do that. That's what it costs to bathe in and drink water. A lot of people will still be bathing in their water or bathing in water from a water buffalo, which you wouldn't normally think of as potable, and then be drinking bottled water. So the expense is huge. And you know, I've heard many tales of gas companies entering into agreements with people in Western Pennsylvania especially, that were non-disclosure agreements in exchange for delivering water. So people were exchanging their First Amendment rights for the ability to have water delivered that was substandard, but that was the position that they were in. I can speak very, very clearly also to something that I'm seeing as a trend, and something that I fear greatly myself if this process were to come to the Delaware River Basin, which is that people in these areas are forced to move. They must leave. Before you arrived on this tour, we visited Crystal Stroud's house. When I visited her just 3 months ago, it was a vibrant home. Her son was playing on the porch. Her husband was there, beautiful furniture, something that they really cared for. When we walked in 2 weeks ago or a week ago, it was empty. She'd been forced to move. Calvin Tillman, the mayor of Dish, the mayor of the town, who has 2 young sons. He knows exactly what the air pollution is that's coming into his windows because he has the air monitors. He's the mayor. He had to move out of his own town for fear of his son's health. This Stephanie Hallowich out in Western Pennsylvania, another person who I've interviewed who's been very outspoken, had acrylonitrile in her water well and benzene in her air, had to move out of her house. And when I called her up a few weeks ago and said, Steph, how's it going? She said, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you anymore. She had signed a non-disclosure agreement. This was one of the most, she had to. She was cornered. Same thing happened with Amy Ellsworth, the person in my film who lighted her water on fire. I called her up one day and said, Amy, how's it going? She said, sorry, I can't talk to you about gas anymore. We could talk about Facebook, we could talk about video games, but we can't talk about gas well. Because when you're in that position and your home is valueless, your water's flammable or your water is poisoned, every ounce of value in your home has disappeared. And you are there forced as a landowner with 2 options. You might be able to go to the media if you feel like that kind of person, and not everybody is. Right? Or you can go ahead and try to sue that company. And the odds are stacked against you. So most likely you're going to be settling out of court with a non-disclosure agreement, and your case history will disappear from the record unless perhaps I have a copy of it. And I do have Amy Ellsworth's water test on this flash drive for you. But if I didn't have them, those records would be sealed, unless there was a congressional subpoena. So this is the kind of thing that's replicated over and over again.
Is there any state that's done non-disclosure prevention laws?
I've been trying to find out the answers to what exactly the legality of a non-disclosure agreement is. I think my belief is that they're unconstitutional. You should not be able to sign away your First Amendment rights because you're being cornered by a huge corporation for everything that you have. I mean, I find them un-American. And they're certainly the mortal enemy of the documentary filmmaker, right? or any scientist, because you're trying to find out this evidence. You're on this trail, and all of a sudden you run into roadblock after roadblock. And I can point to something very significant with regards to this. John Fenton, whose wife Kathy has lost her sense of smell, who's suffering health effects, and so is his mother-in-law, who lives right near him, and himself. They're all experiencing health problems. 5 years ago, his neighbor's water was contaminated with an odorless and colorless contaminant. He didn't know about it because his neighbor had settled with a gas company and signed a non-disclosure agreement and moved away. If he had known 5 years previously that that had been part of the public record, he and his wife and his mother-in-law might have not become ill. And so you have a situation where these companies are cornering residents who've been contaminated, making those records disappear from the public so that you can't access them, I can't access them, and so that you can continue to say this mantra of there's never been a proven case of water contaminated by hydraulic fracturing, because those are literally disappeared. And the point of all this, this long list of things here, is that there has never been a proven instance where hydraulic fracturing is safe. It has never been proven. It has never been subjected to any scientific rigor. So when you're talking about a regulatory framework, you're doing guesswork. And basically that's more motivated by politics than it is by, or greed, than it is for the actual concern of the citizens of the state. You wouldn't be issuing drugs with these many chemicals in them to the general public and go, oh, well, we think they're safe. I believe it's safe. Your first impulse would be, well, does the FDA also believe it's safe? You wouldn't get on an airplane where the pilot would say, well, I think it's safe. You know, I'm pretty sure it's safe. Would you? I'm pretty sure it's safe. Step on Bob's airline, you know. And the FAA operates to a 99.69 record of safety. That is safe. Not 95%. Not 5% of well casings are going to fail. And that's just one of the possible many hundreds of problems that could go wrong. It can contaminate water, or can make your situation unlivable in those areas. So, you know, for a long time, New York was a centerpiece of sanity on this issue, until we opened this back up again. I was just in South Africa, and I heard the same line from the people who would like to drill. I believe it can be done safely. I said, on what ground? Well, luckily, South African government renewed their 6-month moratorium. They didn't buy it. We did not have that happen in this state. And in fact, I believe that based on all these citizen testimonies, we have enough information now to say, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to subject our citizens to this kind of terror. Because oftentimes that is the word that people use when they discover their water is flammable. I was terrified. I couldn't sleep. Amy Ellsworth, who was silenced, remind you, was showering in the dark because she was afraid that her light bulb would spark and it would blow up her shower while she was in it. You know? These are the conditions that people were living in. To not understand if the ground underneath you and the water that's coming through your house is safe. And this is a very legitimate concern. If your water is flammable, you have coming through your pipes unfiltered natural gas, which includes all the things that you might refine out of it, benzene, toluene, xylene. So you're being exposed through your water pipes to gas that would be considered illegal to use in the home in any other context. So when you're dealing with this proposal, the gas industry would like you to believe that you're in some kind of a life raft, you know, that here we are out in the middle of the ocean, you know, and we're going to drown and die unless we start eating each other, you know. But we're not in a life raft. There are so many other ways that New York can develop energy resources that are clean, that are renewable, that are proven, that are tested, that work, that are 21st century, not 18th century technologies. And the New York State's always been a very bold leader in moving in that direction. So when you consider this proposal, you can't just consider it a proposal of, we got to do this drilling thing or die, or we're going to do this and we have economic ruin. We're talking about, because the industry will use those arguments to hold them over your head. What we're talking about here is choices about where the 21st century is going to go in terms of energy. And this is the one that makes the least sense. It makes the most sense for antiquated fossil fuel industries who are dying to make money, but the least sense for the health and the welfare of the state, and for the progress of the human race. So there are many other things in this testimony. I will submit it formally on this Texas-sized flash drive and in the film. And I will also remind the panel that I am in the process of making Gasland 2. You may turn up in it. Camera's right over there. And that's just a reminder that this is happening on the world stage. That this debate, which I think is extremely important, and I really commend you for holding it, will determine policy not only for New York, but around the country and around the world. And that has been my experience talking to people from Colorado, saying, go find out what can happen in New York, maybe we can get some help. Same thing in Australia, same thing in France, Quebec, South Africa. All eyes are here, and you guys are in the lead, and I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Josh.
Say, Josh is relieving that an industry spokesman, when I mentioned your movie, told me, an industry lobbyist told me, well, methane gas comes out of people's taps all the time. I don't know what the issue is.
You know,
It
I'm
lights
sorry,
on fire
I'm
naturally.
over time, but this naturally occurring methane argument is
Yes.
a little bit, I would just want to put one thing in your mind.
Yes.
The tobacco industry said that lung cancer was naturally occurring. They did that for decades. They hired a firm called Hill & Knowlton, a PR agency, to promote that idea. The gas industry hired Hill & Knowlton to attack my film. Same agency, same argument. You can light the water on fire naturally.
But Josh, it's not just methane. Methane, in many instances,
Oh, right.
Right.
leads to these families' problems. And that naturally recurring argument is something we absolutely have to do.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Natalie Brand?